breaks your heart. It just breaks your heart. I'm watching a video now of Baltimore. I was watching the fires that were raging in the city. There's morons torch the city in response to police brutality. You know, it strikes me a lot like the Islamic response. You know, Muslims claim that they're being picked on, and therefore they're righteous and being able to go off and make others pay, and they always have those pay who have nothing to do with their situation. You know, Larry and I talk on the Friday shows quite often about the fact that both of us are nonviolent. I am particularly nonviolent. I see almost no use of violence. I think violence is always a horrible response, and that words are a vastly more effective tool. So not only won't I engage in violence, I will never inspire someone to violence, and in fact, to the contrary. But there is the only thing that I've ever considered being violent about, and I've never done it, but that's never happened. But if someone were to deliberately and purposefully harm a member of my family, go out of their way to inflict pain and suffering on a member of my family, I'd kill them. Absolutely, unequivocally, kill them. If it's grave bodily injury and harm done to a member of my family as a sadistic act, yeah, I kill them. And you're welcome to judge whether or not that is an appropriate response. I'm just, telling you that's the only place where I know that I would likely be violent, and I'll suffer the consequences of it if it happens. But it's another thing altogether to go and injure people and destroy property that has nothing to do with anything that you've been part of. And throughout the Islamic world, they're enslaving little Christian girls and making them sex slaves. And it didn't do anything to them. They're bombing mosques of the opposing sect. They didn't do anything to them. The 9/11 suicide bombers. There was no one in those office buildings that they killed. None of the 3,000 individuals they killed had anything to do with Islam. Nothing. And this random killing is random rioting, making the CVS store that was the epicenter of the firestorm last night in Baltimore, burning that store down, depriving those people of their jobs and the stockholders of their value, and the people in that community of an asset. What in the world? Is your mind just not even capable of functioning? How do you equate the fact that a 25-year-old man suffered a spinal injury and died because, police are out of control today, and that we need to deal with the climate associated with police, who they hire, disassociating them from the military as opposed to associating them with the military, and changing their tactics entirely so that they can't arrest people this harshly, so that they can't demand that a person freezes, grovels in the dirt, and surrenders to them, so that they don't carry weapons that are the first response when they perceive a threat. There's a lot of things we can do. But rioting indiscriminately is not one of them. Watching the video, too, and seeing these thugs throw stones, attacking and destroying cars and throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails, and you just say, oh, we're savages. And then the other thing that strikes me as these people were running and rioting in behaving so badly is that it was definitely a racial issue in the sense that the response was the writers were almost exclusively African American, black. And they had formed a gang mentality. I'm not saying they were all part of the same gang. I'm not saying that at all. But if you want to understand human behavior, it's important to understand gang mentality. A gang of people, doesn't matter their race or religion, but a gang of people will act in a far more heinous way than any individual. An individual by themselves is usually checked by their whatever is left of their conscience, and an individual by themselves will typically go and riot and loot and maim and destroy. But as part of a gang, the mentality is that I don't have to make the moral call here. I'll just go along with the gang. And so gangs, not only by their sheer numbers, do vastly more harm, but collectively a gang, other than having the collective conscience of the whole, doesn't even have the collective conscience of the one. And so we see gang mentality here. And as Glenn has pointed out, we're going to see more and more of that. People are going to respond as gangs. And then we're going to see the most powerful gang in the world, the U.S. military, respond. And it's going to be an escalation of gang warfare. The military gang against the citizenry gang. But boy, when you watch that, the videos, people out of control of what anarchy does, what you're looking at there, my friends, is the future. Whether Glenn is right in his expectation that this is going to be the summer of our discontent, or whether this is just a birth pang, and that total anarchy is still 11 years in our future, it's going to occur. And it is frightening. Now, if I may, I'd like to return to Yahowah's testimony. Let's pick up where we left off. God said, and these words are clear, this one and only covenant of mine, my one and only family, my particular, singular, and unique home, which relationally and beneficially, as a result of the fact that there's only one family, only one home, only one heaven, only one way to be part of this family and home, therefore, relationally and beneficially, you should actually observe everything associated with it. You should closely examine and carefully consider. Literally, you should diligently and consistently pay especially close attention to the details so that you genuinely understand, come to care about, and witness the entire fabric of the tapestry that is comprised of my home, my family, says God. This should be your first and ultimate priority in life, is to pay especially close attention to my one and only covenant, to my one and only family, to my one and only home. That should not only be your priority, because I've only got one of it, and it's my family and my home, but it's the single most important thing you can do in life is to closely examine and carefully consider everything associated with it. My friends, there's only one place where the covenant is introduced. There's only one place where the covenant is explained. There's only one place that you can go to examine, to consider, to observe the terms and conditions associated with participating in God's one and only family and entering His one and only home. There's only one place where the benefits of that one and only covenant are delineated. The path to enter God's home is presented in only one place. And if you do not closely examine and carefully consider the guidance that He has provided regarding entry into His home and participation in His family, in His Torah, then you will never engage in a relationship with Him. You will never come to know Him as He actually is. You will never see heaven. There is only one way to enter God's family. There's only one way to engage in a relationship with Him. There's only one place that He can be known. There's only one document that presents the terms and conditions to participate in the covenant and enter God's home. There's only one place where the benefits of the covenant are explained. Only one document that delineates the path to God's home, beginning with the doorway to His home called Passover. And if you are not closely examining and carefully considering the Torah, you will not find it. You will never come to know Him. You will never be involved in a relationship with Him. You'll never see heaven. That's why God said, I've only got one family. I've only got one home. And therefore, relationally and beneficially, you ought to examine and consider everything I have to say about it. And if your folks are focused on Jesus Christ and His church, if you're having Bible studies and reading from your New Testament, you're never going to find this covenant. You'll never understand what it takes to participate in it. You'll never come to know the God who authored it, who created it, who is the Father of it. God's advice to you, under the auspices of free will, is to closely examine and carefully consider, to observe everything He had to say about His one and only covenant family and home, as it is relationally and beneficially presented in His Torah. There's nothing more important for you to know than this. Family of mine, covenant of mine, home of mine, which relationally and beneficially exists so that you should observe it, carefully examine, closely consider, diligently, consistently pay a special attention to. Strive to genuinely understand. Between me, bien, for the purpose of understanding. Bien. Bien is written here 3 different times, folks. There is no mistaking what bien means. Bien is the Hebrew word for making connections, to understand the connection between things that leads to the single most valuable asset in the universe, understanding. Knowledge is a very important thing. I'm a big fan of observing, so is Yahowah, so as to know. But when you begin, when you make the connections between things so that you transition, you grow beyond knowing to understanding. Understanding is eminently more powerful, enlightening, beneficial. You see, I would not be doing this program if Yahowah hadn't made it possible for us to make connections so as to understand. Because there's lots of people that know much more than I do. And I would feel way too vulnerable to talk about any of these subjects as we do on this program. But Yahowah has made it possible for us to, with our nesama, with our conscience, with our ability to discern fact from fiction, that which is trustworthy and that which is unreliable. Yahowah has made it possible for us to use this method of making connections to, if we are diligent about this process of observation, to move from being ignorant to knowing, and then from knowing to understanding. And once you are in a position where you understand, then there's just total comfort. Total and complete comfort. Total and complete confidence. You're given a perspective to evaluate everything, to understand everything. Now, everything fits. You come to know exactly who God is, and you understand what He is offering and why He is offering it in that way. So there's nothing, folks, that I would encourage more than closely examining and carefully considering, observing the beneficial and relational aspects of Yahowah's family, His home, His covenant. Because if you do that and examine what He had to say in His Torah about these things, and then consider it, and then you make the connections between everything else that He had to say, including those invitations to walk to Him, to become perfected by Him. If you compare the terms of the covenant to the 10 statements that He etched in stone, if you compare the benefits of the covenant to the first 4 Moed Mikre, which have been fulfilled, Pesach, Matzah, Bokurim, and Shavuah, you make those connections. You look at the way the letters are shaped to form these words and the pictures that they draw, and you make the connection between the letters and the words themselves. Then you will transition from knowing to understanding. And God cannot be known unless you read and therefore observe His introduction to us, His Torah. His family cannot be known unless you read what the guidance in His Torah that He provided about it. And all of these things cannot be understood unless you make the connections between everything He had to say. And then is when you transition to understanding. And with understanding, you're put in a position where you can respond. That's why He said, this one and only family of mine, home of mine, covenant of mine, relationally and beneficially, you should actually and continuously observe. Between you, for the purpose of becoming aware, of understanding, of making connections, and between me, for the purpose of coming to know and understand me, as a result of being perceptive and prudently considering the insights which are discernible regarding me, and your offspring, between your offspring, for the purpose of them understanding and them knowing, following you. For this specific reason, I want you to circumcise your every male for them to remember. Circumcision is about understanding. It's about remembering. It's about making the connections between things, and not just anything. God's family and home. We'll be back in a moment. Not only is Yahowah's request clear and unequivocal, not only does Yah's request affirm His previous appeal, not only does it reinforce the ubiquitousness of the one and only covenant, it encourages us to be observant, to think, so that we come to understand precisely what God is asking of us. It is a relationship, after all. In every relationship, something is expected from both parties. It's important that you know what God is asking of us. But also, this statement is additive. It provides us with the final covenant requirement. Circumcise our sons so that they remember, so that we understand, so that they understand the covenant. So I ask you, when Paul, the author of half of the Christian New Testament, screamed out against circumcision in his letter to the Galatians, demeaning it while promoting a second and different covenant. Why did anyone believe him? Why does anyone believe him today? All you have to do is read what Yahowah had to say about his one and only family, his one and only covenant, and understand what he told us we needed to do if we wanted to participate in it, to know that Paul was lying. It's not hard. Why have billions of souls been beguiled into believing Paul? Sometimes, if we pause long enough, if we dig deep enough, if we are especially observant and thoughtful, we learn something we would otherwise miss. Such is the case here. Mul, which was the word translated circumcise, was scribed in the niffle stem. The niffle is the passive form of the call and conveys three ideas. First, it is a relational term, affirming the fact that circumcision is germane to our relationship with God. Second, it requires a literal interpretation of the testimony, meaning that these circumcisions are to be actual and not merely symbolic. And third, the niffle, as the reflexive counterpart of the call, indicates that the subject, which is you and me as parents, receive the benefit of the verb's action, which is circumcision. Collectively, then, when the niffle stem is used in conjunction with mul, especially in this context, we discover that by actually circumcising our sons, we as parents benefit from the act. It is as if we ourselves are being circumcised. And that is a very good thing, because circumcision is the one and only sign of the covenant. It affirms our acceptance, confirming our willingness to be cut into this relationship with God and to receive all of His benefits. We are in essence saying, we will raise our children to be Yah's children. Bringing it all together, God has systematically presented the guidance and instructions necessary for us to know Him, for us to relate to Him, for us to understand what He's offering. After asking us to walk away from all forms of Babel confusion, including family traditions and national allegiances, particularly religious corruption, Yahowah encouraged us to trust and rely upon Him instead. Then He asked us to walk away from these things, but not just in any direction, to walk towards Him so that we can become perfect, with His Torah providing the directions. God's fourth request, indeed His requirement with regard to our participation in His family and entry into His home, was presented in the previous two statements. He wants us to continuously and genuinely observe everything that He has shared with us regarding His covenant, His family, and His home, focusing upon and diligently considering the conditions and benefits of this relationship. He knows that when we come to appreciate what He is offering, that we'll respond appropriately. And so now, to demonstrate our understanding, to help us remember everything He has shared with us, God is asking us to circumcise our sons. Consider it a signature, a vow, to accept and embrace this extraordinary gift, the opportunity to engage in a personal relationship with our Heavenly Father, with the author of life, with the Creator of the universe. If we want to participate in Yahowah's covenant, if we want to be born into His spiritual family, if we want to live forever, be perfected by Him, enriched by Him, empowered by Him, adopted by him. We're asked to circumcise our sons. It is as simple as that. Written in the infinitive absolute and followed by call all, there is no room for negotiation or interpretation. We can either accept Yahowah's terms or reject them, but we cannot alter them to suit us as Pauline Christianity has done. Since Yahowah has established one prerequisite and 4 requirements for participation in his covenant, to be part of his family and to enter his home, we must walk away from Babylon, away from mankind's political, religious, economic, and military schemes. We must come to trust and rely upon Yahowah, which necessitates us coming to know him and understanding what he is offering. We must walk to him along the specific path which he has prepared in the Torah that begins with a doorway, which is followed by the means not only to eternal life, but to perfection and to adoption, to enrichment and to empowerment, to enabling us to act as family members, communicating what God has said to others, so that his chosen people, Yahudim, Yahudah, Yisrael, can be reconciled in this covenant relationship, and that collectively, as one big family, we can enter God's home on Sukkah and live together with him. That's the path that he has prepared and outlined in his Torah, making us perfect, immortal, adopted, enriched and empowered, so that we carefully and continually observe his covenant. And that means men must be circumcised. So let's consider why he has asked us to do this very specific thing. He said, "And you shall cut off and separate mole, you shall circumcise." This was described again in the Niflsim, which is used to convey the voice of genuine relationships where the subject, which is you and me as parents, receives the benefit of the verb, which is circumcision, in the perfect conjugation, designating that this instruction and resulting action should be considered whole and complete. You do it once, good forever. And in the consecutive, thereby associating it with bashar, our flesh. So your foreskins, the fold of the skin covering the conical tip of the masculine genitalia, associated with the flesh, the physical body and animal nature. It's a way of saying, I'm going to separate myself from my animal nature, from the family of humankind, from all of the corruptions of human institutions, of all of the frailties and failings of humanity. I'm going to separate from the human family to join God's family. That's what circumcision represents. And it's done on the place of the masculine genitalia that is designed for us to not only get the point, because it's the part of the reproduction cycle, is where we are joined as one, as husband and wife, and we conceive a family. It's the part of us that is very hard for us to forget. A constant reminder at the genesis of life and of family, that it is all about family. It is all about life. It's about raising children and a loving family with a father and mother, nurturing them, protecting them, uplifting them. All signs of the covenant, all things that Yahowah himself does on behalf of his spiritual children. And God says, and this will exist, Haya. This was, this is, and this forever will be, described in the call perfect, signifying the relationship is genuine and unchanging. As the sign to remember the oath of the family relationship, of the home, of the covenant. Oath is the Hebrew word that conveys that it's an example to visually illustrate and explain. It's the symbol and standard. It's the pledge of attestation. It is the miraculous nature of something that serves as a sign. It was written here in the singular, as in the one and only sign of the family-oriented covenant relationship, beret, the mutually binding familial agreement, the household promise, the relational accord, the marriage vow based on home and family. Described here in the feminine singular, described in the construct form, eternally associating the beret covenant with the oath sign of mul, circumcision. Between me for the purpose of making a connection, and between you promoting understanding. Yahowah has now used the end 5 times to communicate that you need to make connections between him and us, between his covenant and our souls, between his family and our family, that we need to make these connections if we wish to understand. Because understanding is the pathway to God. We'll be back. You know, I was talking with Scott briefly during the break. And what I said to Scott was, Yahowah has laid out 5 terms and conditions for participating in his covenant family. They're 5. You walk away from Babel, from religion and politics, from man's economic schemes and militaristic tendencies. Disassociate yourself from them. And instead of relying on government and your military, your religion, instead of relying on those things, you rely on him. You can't have both, one or the other. And to rely on him, of course, you have to come to know him. I rather like him. I like him a lot. I suppose that if I didn't like the God that's presented in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, I may not have been engaged in the covenant. Because spend eternity with someone's a long time. I like him. Now, my endorsement of him is meaningless. You get to know him yourself, if you haven't already. But don't choose to participate in the covenant just because you don't want the alternative. Only choose it if you come to know him and like him. Eternity is a very long time. Now, the other aspect I talked to Scott about is the conditions of the covenant itself. There's 5 of them. And those 5 conditions of the covenant, I appreciate. I agree with. Now, my agreement with them, my appreciation of them should mean nothing to you. But you ought to consider them and decide whether or not you agree with them. You know, if there was a couple of the 5 terms and conditions that I didn't see eye to eye with at all, if I didn't understand, if I thought it was a burden, that I thought was, God, I don't understand why you're doing that. Considering the benefits of the covenant, I'd still accept them. And the last thing I would do, I would have privately my own challenges, and I have in the past. I don't think I have any anymore. But in the past, I've had challenges where I say, God, I don't understand why you're doing it this way. And, we would have discussions over those things. And mostly he'd direct me to passages where I would read them and say, okay, now I understand. But the fact of the matter is, I like the terms and conditions of this covenant. I agree with them. I understand them. I know why they're a benefit not only for me and for you, but why God had to establish them that way for eternity to be any fun. If he didn't establish them that way, if he didn't tell you to jettison your religious and political affiliations before you come to know him, you come to want to participate in this covenant, if he didn't do that, then eternity in heaven would be more miserable than the worst experiences here on earth, because we simply drag all of that stuff with us. Gosh, why do that? They say eternity is a long time. I understand why God doesn't want us to be promoting some religious or political or military patriotic agenda. And why that's not welcome in his home. I agree with him. I want it to be that way. I understand why God wants us to walk to Him and become perfect. That He wants us to engage. He wants us to participate. That He wants us to look at the signs that He has posted along the way. He wants us to understand and appreciate the plan that He has created, the path that He has provided for us to enter His home. I like it. I appreciate it. I think it's wonderful. I would invite you to walk down it, but not until you also understand it. I get it why God has told us that the means to engaging in a relationship with Him is by being observant so that we come to know, and then making connections so we understand. Because guess what, folks? That's what we're going to be doing that's going to be entertaining, that's going to cause us to grow throughout eternity. If you don't like observing so as to know and making connections so as to understand, you're not only going to be miserable in God's home, you're going to make the rest of us miserable. So I understand why God emphasized this. It's what we're going to be doing forever. And I appreciate all of the symbolism, all of the connections, all of the benefits associated with circumcision. I'm glad He had a sign. And I'm glad that sign is physical as well as it is spiritual. I like what He's offering. I concur with it. I would have it no other way. I am delighted with what God is offering and what He is requesting of us. We'll talk to you tomorrow.